Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Bill Murphy, your host of the Red Zone podcast. Today, I have none other than Brett Johnson. Now, Brett, at one point, was the United States' most wanted criminal. He was given the moniker of the original Internet Godfather by the United States Secret Service. He's responsible for defining modern financial cybercrime as we know it. He created the precursor to today's dark web, in those days called the Darknet markets, called ShadowCrew. In the early 2000s, through ShadowCrew, he assembled a watering hole for cybercriminals to network, share information, gang up, execute attacks on entities worldwide. He lived a life of crime for decades. Credit card fraud, identity fraud, tax fraud, social engineering attacks, you name it. It's actually quite stunning when you listen to the conversation with him. If it could be done, Brett did it. His criminal lifestyle eventually caught up with him as he was captured and convicted of 39 felonies and sent to prison multiple times, and he even escaped once. And before he accepted total responsibility for his actions and finding redemption and through his loved ones and through a special friend with the FBI. And today, Brett works as a security consultant and public speaker. And as you might imagine, everybody wants him because he knows how things are done behind the scenes. And he's one of the world's foremost authorities on cybercrime and identity theft. And he uses this knowledge today to help individuals and companies. So I was fascinated by these stories. This is a conversation in which you're going to learn how cybercriminals operate, what drives them, and the common security threats. But we talk stories. You want to listen to stories and just turn this on and do the dishes or drive to your kids' game. This is the type of conversation you're going to want to do this with. So I want everybody to have fun. Brett it's just unbelievable to see how someone could be so down a dark hole and pull themselves back out. It's quite a heroic story of going from zero to hero. And we have a lot to learn from his story. With that, I want to welcome you to my conversation with Brett Johnson. Okay, Brett, I want to welcome you to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So this is going to be a fun one for everybody. I think we're at a very interesting, we're in very, very interesting world today. And I think, there's I told the story recently. This is a company we're working with today that is actually a sub company. We're working with the parent company. And this is a sister company that's recently acquired, but it's big. It's a 2,000 person company. And so they know, the parent company didn't just shove the security team onto them and say, you're the new security team. Like there's a lot of politics. And so we weren't essentially representing them, although the parent company really wanted us to. Well, it just so happens that this company, this sub company now is 2,000 users, completely haven't been able to work for a week due to ransomware, infecting, taking down the entire business.
So 2,000,
yeah. And this is so it's a significant business outage. And so I think we're at this point where businesses are being taken down, hospitals are being taken down. And I want to talk about your unique expertise, which was developed in this amazing way over time. And maybe we could start with your story and what do you do today? And let's talk about what got you there.
Sure. So let's talk about what I do today, because as you know, Bill, I tell the story a lot. I do. Today, I'm a public speaker. I keynote a lot of conferences. I'm also a consultant. Now, what do I consult with? I consult regarding cybersecurity, cybercrime, identity theft. I'm highly regarded, at least as a good guy. I was highly regarded as a bad guy. I mean, the way I got my experience was not really from a book. It was from being hands-on. The United States Secret Service, they called me the original Internet Godfather. And, I was recording my podcast last night, and I said that, and it got me. I sat there for a second, and I just paused. I was like, man.
So let's put that in frame of what year did that come out where the South Carolina made that statement? What year was that?
That was 2005.
2005.
2000.
So essentially you built an essential first dark web where essentially replicated what the Godfather had done, kind of physically and kinetically and metaphorically in New York, Philly, Boston. You did that online.
Yeah. If what happens is before the group that I built is called ShadowCrew. As you mentioned, it was a precursor to today's Darknet and Darknet markets. It did lay the foundation for the way modern cybercrime channels still operate today. And the way it works is, before ShadowCrew, there's actually 3 websites. There's Counterfeit Library, ShadowCrew, and Carter Planet. Carter Planet was ran by a guy named Dmitry Golubov, Ukrainian national. I ran and built both Counterfeit Library and ShadowCrew. Me and 2 other guys did. What happens is if you're looking at engaging in cybercrime before those 2 websites come up, the only real avenue you had to do that was a IRC chat session, this rolling chat board. You didn't really know who you were talking to, if you could trust them, if you could buy an item from them, whatever. So you were getting ripped off all the time. Anybody could come on there and claim they had anything and you had no idea. What ShadowCrew did was it provided a trust mechanism that criminals could use.
Okay.
So now you had a large communication channel, a forum. You had a forum all of a sudden that people from different time zones could engage in conversations. They could learn from conversations. They could, talk with somebody that, had posted something a month ago or 3 weeks ago or 3 years ago. You knew by looking at someone's screen name what the person's skill level was, if you could trust them, if you could learn from them, if you could network with them.
Okay.
We had vouchers in place. And you mentioned it a second ago. A vouch back then, and it's pretty much the same now, but it was based on that type of gangster vouch that you see in the Godfather movies. Someone vouches for you. If I vouch for you,
social proof. It's like a social proof.
Absolutely. I take complete responsibility for you when I vouch for you. If you go off and you rip someone off, if you steal money from another user, it's my responsibility to make that complete for you. All right. That's the seriousness we took with it. We had escrow systems in place. We had all these things in place so that a criminal who doesn't know another criminal, who will never see or know the real name of another criminal on the other side of the planet, can engage with that person and trust that person. Because what you're dealing with cybercrime, 3 things have to take place for that crime to succeed. You have to gather data. You steal the PII, the bank accounts, the credit card numbers, whatever. So you gather the data. Then you have to commit the crime with that gathered data, with that stolen data. So you have to, hit the merchant or retailer for the MacBook Pros. You have to file claims with the unemployment office, since this is COVID-19 year, or whatever that crime is. And then finally, you have to put cash in pocket. So you gather data, commit a crime, and cash it out. The problem with that is, and I'm no different, the problem with that is that a single criminal, he's not good at all 3 things. He's good in one thing, sometimes 2, very rarely all 3. And that's why you see these these forums, these marketplaces, these dark web and surface web groups, they exist so that one specific criminal can network with other criminals who are good in areas where that one guy is not. And that's the basis of what we see today with cybercrime channels.
So you essentially had partnered with other folks that had different skill sets. So we often say, well, we're being one of the ways that a hack can happen is someone clicks on a link, it infects the server, and then it's quietly there. And someone in another area of the world then sees that there's a heartbeat there, and it establishes a remote connection. Okay, but that's just one skill. That's just one skill. And it's a very technical skill, and it's and essentially you could create a botnet of these listeners waiting for heartbeats to open up in a corporate network. But then what happens next?
Well, think of it. We had mentioned ransomware a couple of moments ago, right? So you've got someone who builds the ransomware. They code it and everything else like that. Now, as that person, he's very good about doing that. That falls into the gathering data area.
Sure.
You've got a product, all right? Can he deploy the product? Maybe not. He can build the hell out of the product.
Gotcha.
But he may not be able to deploy it. So he has to rely on someone else to deploy it. A good social engineer. Someone that's maybe using Unicode domains, or maybe,
Okay.
he's coming in and maybe he drops a thumbstick out in the parking lot, or whatever that is. Maybe the router, because, we've got 41% of all routers on the planet have the default password. Maybe the router's compromised. Whatever that may be, I don't know. All right. But you rely on that second guy to do that. Now, ransomware exists so that criminals can profit. If they can't profit by that at the end of the day, why even build it? Why even try to deploy it? Sure. So what's the chance of person A or person B knowing how to launder money? Maybe not. Maybe not. That's why we see on a lot of cybercrime channels now, you have somebody that is able to steal, get wired out $3-4 million to a bank account that he's set up. All right. But they can't cash it out in time. Just because it's wired out of one account into another doesn't mean that you've stolen that much. That means that you've just got that much wired out. You need to know how to do that properly, how to get the money out quickly and effectively and anonymously. So you rely on a bunch of money mules or laundering mechanisms that are already part of that platform of whatever cybersecurity group or cybercrime group that you're part of. Okay.
So that's really interesting. So you not only have the technical skills to build the piece of malware, but then you have the social skills to either with dropping USBs or somehow a social engineer looking at LinkedIn or whatever that may be. And then you have the financial, not just the financial skills, but you have to know the mechanisms to move money within. It seems like a big part of this is anonymity.
It is. You have to remain secret. And let me give you another example. And Lord knows I talk about this a lot in my presentations. Do you want me to talk about Tesco, or you want me to talk about unemployment? You tell me.
Well, unemployment. We can talk about elections too.
We can talk about elections too, because I complain a lot these days. So unemployment, for example, the Nigerians hit Washington State for $1 billion.
$1 billion. Okay.
$1 billion in unemployment fraud. So how does that happen from the bad guy side? Well, the way it happens from the bad guy side is the Nigerians. First, you have to realize that cybercrime is not rocket science. It's not sophisticated. We have this perception that attackers are really sophisticated computer geniuses. They're not. More of them are just social engineers. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have a lot of highly capable attackers out there that understand computer systems, that understand those high-level attacks. But you don't need a lot of them. All right, you just need a few of them.
Okay.
Because of the way the system works. So unemployment works because that fraud was successful because the Nigerians, they said to themselves, they had an idea. They were like, I wonder if you could file fake unemployment claims. So they tested it. Now, they already had the information because everyone's PII is already compromised. Just look at the year before last, we had 1,500 just reported breaches. Of those 1,500 just reported, 2.6 billion records compromised just then. And that's on a yearly basis, we see numbers like that. So everyone's information is already available. So they had the data. Yeah. Okay, they had gathered the information. How do you commit the crime? Well, it turns out that the only thing it took to file for those benefits was someone's social, the name, an address, and a phone number. That was it. As long as you inputted that in, if no one else had already filed for that individual, you were getting those benefits. So the Nigerians, they test it. They see that it's not only successful, but wildly successful. So they start filing the claims. Now, here's where the failure happens. They actually get $1 billion wired out to Nigerian banks. $1 billion. Now, did they get to keep $1 billion? No, they didn't. Because I guess they didn't expect that level of success. All right. They got to keep 200 million, but they lost 800 million because they couldn't get it out of the bank in time.
Okay.
That's what you see all the time. You talk about business email compromise. It's extremely easy, and that's a social engineering attack.
Yep.
It's extremely easy to trick a payroll department into switching banking information, maybe get a couple $1 million wired out to a bank account. Yep. That doesn't mean that you get to keep that money. That means that you've had it wired out. All right. That's what typically attackers, they're more concentrated on committing the crime and not following it through to that end game. And the end game, if you can't put the money in your pocket, that becomes a problem. If you, the FBI, and I'm fortunate enough, I get to speak at Quantico twice a year these days, but the FBI, as far as reclaiming business email compromise funds, it's about 85% successful in that.
Okay.
I mean, it's highly effective, and it's simply because criminals don't follow through that end game. They don't really look at it. They think that, they're more concentrated on stealing the money, and don't realize that just because you get the money sent out doesn't mean you profit anything at all. And that boils down to what we're talking about of understanding these three compartments, these three necessities of cybercrime. Each one of them have their own, import there. So it's very important that you gather data, that the data is valid. It's very important that when you're gathering the data that you're not identified. Same thing with committing the crime. You want to be anonymous with that. And then finally, cashing out. If you can't put the cash in the pocket, if you can't do it without being identified, look at all these idiots that are using Bitcoin. So if you can't do it without being identified, what's the point?
Yeah, and I think are you finding that the anonymity on the Bitcoin side is probably a lot better than just wire transfer of U.S. cash, correct?
It is. So you can move massive amounts of value with cryptocurrency, right?
Yeah.
And if you're using Monero or one of these anonymous coins, at least they used to be anonymous. If you're using one of those, it's very difficult to track it, especially if the guy the criminal has any understanding of the way that blockchain works at all. We're seeing now there's been a lot of effort recently from security companies and global law enforcement to be able to track those those anonymous crypto tokens, specifically Monero. There's been a lot of headway that's been made in that. All those coins are short-lived as far as anonymity goes right now.
Okay. Yeah, I figured it was only a matter of time before those crypto keys are going to be compromised with law enforcement. So, a big part of your story is you're not just coming into this from an academic approach or, you graduated from college with a degree in computer science. You came at it because from some dark places and were very successful on the other side. Maybe you could talk about when did you first get exposed to criminal behavior? So versus I'm going to go mow 10 lawns and make $50 per lawn or $10 per lawn as a child. You were exposed to this early on. Maybe you could talk about a little bit about that.
Sure. I'm from Eastern Kentucky. I mean, that's the start right there. I'm from Eastern Kentucky. Eastern Kentucky it's kind of like one of these areas of the panhandle of Florida, parts of Louisiana that, it's very poor. It's very poor. If you're not fortunate enough to have a job, you may be on the government draw. You may be involved in some sort of scam, hustle, fraud, whatever. My mom, and I say this, and she calls me, I guess last month, 6 weeks ago, cussing me out because she had finally, after 4 years, she finally sits down and listens to one of my presentations. So she calls me up, threatening to kill me, everything else. My mom was basically the captain of the entire fraud industry. And no crime too big or too small. This is a woman who at one point, she steals a 108,000-pound Caterpillar D9 bulldozer.
That's a huge machine.
It's huge. It's gigantic. All right. She steals this thing. Another point, she takes a slip and phone to a convenience store. She tries to sue the owner. We had a neighbor she used to pimp out. This is my mom. My dad was not like that. Honestly, my dad was a good guy. He was. He had, in Eastern Kentucky, it's hard to get away from that type of hustle or criminal mentality because of the poverty levels there. Okay. So my dad had that in him, but he was a good man. He would work hard. This man would work hard, just trying to provide for family. My dad's problem was he loved my mom so much that he became the enabler in this relationship. So it was, if she came up with an idea to commit a crime or whatever, he would support it. If she wanted to abuse people, me and my sister, or him, he would let it happen. And she was abusive. She could be physical, and she was physical. She was physical up until the point, I don't think I talked about that in my podcast, or maybe Denise did, but she was beating Denise with a buckle of a belt. Denise, for no reason. And Denise caught the belt and kicked her through a closet. And that was the last time that mom ever touched us physically at that point. She, like I said, she could be physical, but where she excelled in abuse was with the mental, the verbal, the the negligence, all that. And she used to bring men home in front of my dad, and my dad would sit there and just beg her, Carolyn, please stop. Don't do that. Don't do that. And he'd cry, and she'd do it anyway. And she finally leaves him. We were in Panama City, Florida at that point. I told you my dad worked hard. My dad was working at that point as a midnight clerk for 7-Eleven. He was making $140 a week was what this man was making.
Wow.
And she leaves him. We moved from Panama City, me, my sister, and my mom, moved from Panama City back to Hazard, Kentucky. And she was a nurse, but she never really worked as a nurse. She would work long enough to, see whatever man she was seeing off to work, and she'd go out and party. And she kept up with those partying ways. So she would leave. I was 10. My sister Denise was 9. She'd go out and party, and she'd leave us at home for days at a time sometimes. And she used to tell us, she used to look at us and, say she'd given up her life for us, that she was going to leave and not come back one day, that we'd find her dead in a ditch or behind a building someplace. It was my mom. So when you're a kid, Bill, you take that shit serious,
Oh, yeah.
But you do. You take that serious. When your parent tells you, so I think that's what a lot of people don't understand is when you're a child, you want to believe in anything your parent says.
Mm-hmm. They're your God.
Yeah, they are. They are.
They represent, the be all and end all. And for sure.
I was a kid that thought mom wasn't coming back sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I'd post up at the window, look outside, see if she's coming home. I'd walk out into the street, see if she was driving down the street. Denise wasn't like that. Denise was a kid who was just angry. She just anger. So mom had been gone for a few days. We didn't have any food in the house. Denise walks in and she's got a pack of pork chops in her hand. And I'm like, where'd you get that? She's like, I stole them. And I'm like, well, show me how you did that. So we go over to A&P and she shows me how she steals food. And I'm like, hell, that's a good idea. Let's eat. So we start stealing food. We get to the point that we're wanting to make sandwiches. And you can't stuff, a loaf of bread down your pants because it's going to get crumbled. So we had to have something to put the loaf of bread in. There's a Kmart across the way. So we go over there and we steal a hoodie and stuff the bread down the sleeve of the shirt, of the hoodie, And then that becomes, once you get by with that at Kmart, well, they've got toys and games and clothes. So we start doing that, stealing all that stuff. Mom comes home finally and she sees all the stuff we've been stealing. She's like, where'd that come from? And I stand up at 10 years old. We found it. She's like, nah, you didn't find that. My sister stands up, and Denise was always like that. Denise stands up and she's half proud. She's half pissed off. She's like, we stole it. My mom looks at my sister and she's like, show me how you did that. And I joke about it, but she started running as a shoplifter. She started, she wanted something stolen or distraction or whatever. She ran us a shoplifter. She goes to get her mom too. So it's her mother, me and my sister. We used to take these road trips to, different parts of the state shoplifting. They'd go in JCPenney's and steal clothes and jewelry. I'd go in the bookstore and steal books because, that's the guy that I am. And I say this and I really mean this. I don't want people to think I'm blaming my childhood on my choices as an adult, because that's not true. I mean, my sister had the exact same upbringing that I did. Other than that one shoplifting experience, she doesn't break the law anymore. She goes off. She's a teacher. She's a great parent. She's a good citizen.
Sure.
I'm just the guy who kept on going. And as I kept going, I got more and more involved in the types of frauds and scams and crime that my mother and that entire side of the family committed. I mean, my granddad used to sit down on the bottom of the porch, underneath the porch, and people would walk up to him with whatever item they had stolen that day. And they'd come with a VCR and try to give him some story. Well, Paul, this is where it came from. And he'd look at me and say, whoa. I am not an FBI agent. I don't care where it came from. What are you wanting for it? So that was my granddad. But I mean, it was forgery. It was charity fraud, insurance fraud. It was drug trafficking. I mean, anything that you could possibly imagine as far as basically trading somebody if they decided they wanted a career in crime later on, which of course I decided that. I ended up branching off on my own in the mid-90s, faked a car accident to get the insurance money to get married, to move from Hazard, Kentucky to Lexington, Kentucky to go to university.
Okay.
So I go there and I'm the kid. I was raised that I was scared that the people, and it was my dad and my mom. I mean, my mom instilled that in me. My dad was scared of losing the people that he loved. So that's what I do. I mean, I'm scared of the people that I love leaving. Got married, told my wife, I was like, hey, don't worry about getting a job. I've got it. I'll work. Don't worry about that. Then told my wife, oh, don't worry about the cooking and cleaning. You just worry about going to school. I've got this. So here I am, dumb Brett. I've got a 50-hour-a-week job. I've got an 18-hour class load. I'm trying to do all the cooking and cleaning. You can't do all that. Something had to give. What gave was a job. And with that proclivity toward fraud I already had, well, you got to make money somehow, don't you? Didn't really know how. And one day I find eBay. And it was evident. I mean, you knew when you looked at eBay that was an environment where you could profit. I didn't really understand how. I didn't understand online crime yet. One night, though, I'm watching Inside Edition. Bill O'Reilly used to host that thing.
Sure.
They've got a show on Beanie Babies.
I remember the Beanie Babies.
Yeah,
oh, yeah.
$5 thing, right? Mid-late 90s. $1,000 Beanie Babies. This one they were profiling was Peanut the Royal Blue Elephant, right?
Yeah.
He was selling for $1,500 on eBay. I sat there watching that show like, I need to find me a Peanut. Next day, I skipped class, go around all the Hallmark stores. This is how naive I was. I thought they'd have one hidden in a base in a bin someplace at a Hallmark store. So I start going to Hallmark stores. I'd sneak over to the bin. I'd start rifling through the Beanie Babies. And finally, out of, despair, I'd go up to the customer service desk. Hey, have you guys got any blue Beanie Baby elephants? And they'd look at me like I was an idiot. So after, 5 or 6 of those shops, I was like, oh, well, he's not at the shops because they're selling for $1,500 on eBay. So, but they did have these gray ones, these gray Beanie Baby elephants for $8. So I'm sitting there going, okay, buy a gray Beanie Baby elephant for $8, stop by Kroger on the way home, pick up a pack of blue Rit dye, go home, try to dye a little guy, put him in a bucket, water in there. So you're sitting there because he's trying to float. You're stuffing him down in the water and you get him out and you realize after 10 minutes of this that he's made out of polyester. He doesn't hold dye very well.
Oh, no.
Get him out of the bath. He looks like he's got the mange. You're sitting there going,
oh,
but I ended up, my first cybercrime, that was my first one. I ripped a lady off of $1,500.
Now on eBay, and then this, how did the social proof is a big part of that platform?
Yep.
Maybe this was just super early and they didn't have those mechanisms built in. But if someone didn't receive the value from their purchase because you dyed it in dye and it wasn't the blue Beanie Baby, how did you then pivot so that you could do that again and again?
So back then, and ShadowCrew ends up forcing companies like PayPal and eBay to change, to implement proper security. It didn't happen until ShadowCrew actually forced their hands on that. All right. So back when I started this stuff, it was the Wild West. There were no security protocols on eBay. You could look at you could get their real name easily. They had their full email address, their contact phone numbers, everything else. It was just right there for you. So what you could do is you could post an item. Like what I did was I found a picture of a real one, posted it. She thought I had the real thing. As soon as she wins the bid, I take the conversation off the eBay platform. Actually, as a matter of fact, eBay didn't even have a platform at that point. They didn't have the instant messaging implemented that they do now. All right. So I sent her an email, and the email was basically, that's where the social engineering kicks in. So what you see time and time again, and I don't really care if it's what the scam is, if it's a romance scam or if you're doing an account takeover or what have you, at some point, social engineering has to kick in. All right. So she wins the bid, and that's where social engineering for me kicks in. I send her an email. Email says, hey, I've never done any business with you. I don't know if I can trust you. What I need you to do, what will protect both of us, is you sending me a United States postal money order. It's guaranteed by the United States government. Your money is protected. I'm guaranteed to get my money. Everyone's happy about that. Well, she believed that without really thinking it through. Because that's the way scams work. You try to get people away from objective thought. You just get them to knee-jerk reaction. That emotion is what you're wanting to do. Okay. So she believed that. She sent me 2 U.S. postal money orders. Now, what I knew was that there was no way for her to cancel those orders. And I also knew that I could take them into U.S. post office and get them cashed right there. So I did that. After I cashed those money orders, I sent her this blue thing. And immediately I get a phone call, because I was, at this point in time, I was doing this under my own name.
Sure.
So I get a phone call, and and she was irate. She was like, I didn't order this. You're trying to rip me off. And my response was, lady, you ordered a blue elephant. I sent you a blue-ish elephant. And what happens is this is where a lot of people, a lot of criminals, you learn this same lesson somewhere along the line, somewhere early along the line, that if you delay a victim long enough, if you rip someone off on, you're saying you got a camera, or this year you're saying you've got a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox X, you rip them off of $5,000, $8,000. They start complaining about it. Even if they may know your real name, they start complaining about it. But if you keep putting them off, I'll send your money back. I'm sorry you didn't get what you wanted to. I'm sorry. I'll make sure you get your money back. You just keep putting them off.
Okay.
Sooner or later, they get exasperated. They throw their hands up in the air. They walk away. You stop hearing from them. And very few people, very few ever complain to law enforcement. That's why you see this year, specifically with PlayStation 5s and Xbox X's, you see people all over the place that are selling these systems that they don't have. And a lot of these scammers will get to keep the money because people just give up after a while. They figure, who am I going to report to? Am I going to report to local law enforcement? Well, they're not going to do anything. Am I going to report to the jurisdiction where I sent the money? They're probably not going to do anything. It's his word against mine. It's what the thought process is. FBI, the dollar amount tends to be slow. They're not going to really look at it. So that's typically what happens.
What type of money are we talking about, Brett? Like when you early on, it's very entrepreneurial in many respects. It's just the dark side of entrepreneurship.
Right.
But it's the same thinking pattern. It's like, you're probably trying to generate as much money in your pocket as possible. Like over a 10-year span, like what did that look like?
10-year span. So I got to the point that an eBay account, because I would set up an eBay account, and I would also set up a bank account to cash out, the items that I wasn't selling. So an eBay account would profit me $12,000 roughly for each eBay account that I set up. And I would run one of those a week. So I was profiting, at one point, $50K a week. $50K a month. All right.
Okay.
Now, as ShadowCrew gets built, we transition. So these whole platforms start out as PayPal fraud and eBay fraud. Okay. It transitions over to credit fraud once we hook up with Dmitry Golubov and the Ukrainians. Okay.
So they have the ability to get the credit card numbers.
They had all the credit information in the world. Okay. And this goes back into this idea that I talked about, the three necessities of cybercrime: gathering data, committing crime, cashing out. So the Ukrainians could gather the data all day long.
Yeah.
They could even commit the crime to a degree. The problem the Ukrainians had was cashing out, because in the Eastern Bloc of Europe at that point in time, every single card had been shut down. There had been so much fraud already that even if you were the legitimate card holder, you couldn't run your card over there.
No way, right.
So all of a sudden, the Ukrainians have all the credit information in the world, no way to put cash in pocket. They have to rely on somebody else. The only game in town, because Dmitry got his idea from the ShadowCrew group, so the only game in town was us. So he comes and we partner at that point. And that's where the genesis of modern credit card fraud takes place, is with Dmitry Golubov, Roman Vega, guys like that. So you start out on eBay fraud, roughly $12,000 per false eBay account or fake eBay account. Credit card theft, you're looking at, if you put, it's not a whole lot of work back then because you didn't really have ABS or anything like that in play. So a credit card thief could profit $40,000 to $50,000 a month fairly easily. Okay. All right. If he knew what he was doing, he could profit that. It takes a little work, but 40 to 50K. I got to the point, because I'm the guy that I was doing all that stuff. And then I got to the point where I happened upon, or I hate to say the word invented, because somebody would have done it if I hadn't, but I started this thing called tax return identity theft. So the reason everyone's tax returns are delayed every single year is the SOB Brett Johnson. I had access, the first PII database I had access to was the Indiana State Sex Offenders Registry. Okay. So you could go on there and it had all the sex offenders in Indiana. It had their social, their mother's maiden name, their driver's license numbers, their dates of birth. Everything. So I'm sitting there, I saw that and I'm like, huh. And my idea, what I started doing was I would open up bank accounts in the names of these sex offenders, and I would commit the crimes under their name. And my thought process was, who's going to complain that a sex offender is being victimized? Nobody. So started doing that and used that so much that Indiana starts removing that PII from that database. First thing that left was the DOB and the SSN, and then it goes from there. So the next database I had access to was the Texas driver's license database. And then finally, I ended up with access to the California State Death Registry. So the idea was I had access to that, and I was like, okay, how does the federal government know you're dead? And the way that works is before 1998, it took the family to file a Social Security death benefit. So you've got a state death index, you've got the federal death index. The only way the federal government knows someone dies is a Social Security death benefit has to be filed for that person.
Sure.
Okay. Prior to 1998, it took the family to do that. After 1998, the hospital, the funeral home, a group like that could do it. So I'm sitting there, I've got access, I researched it enough, I find that out, and my first thing was, I wonder if, I could file for Social Security benefits on these people. That would give me an incoming check every month. So I started trying to do that, and the answer was no, because the number had been dormant for so long. Wow. They wanted you to come in for an in-person interview. And that was no, because here I am at 34, and, I'm trying to pass myself off as 63, 65, something like that. So the next thing was, well, I wonder if you could file tax returns on people like this. So the way cybercrime operates, the high tier attackers, and I don't care if it's someone that's a computer genius or a very good social engineer, it's all about doing as much research as you can. So you read white papers. With me, I ordered this big ass book on tax law. Okay. And you just read through every single thing. I pull up all the indictments that I can regarding tax fraud to find out what's going on, how people are doing it, and everything else. And then you start doing you put your operation in play. What does it take in order to try to defraud the United States government? So you basically over prepare.
Sure.
And it doesn't matter what it is.
By learning about reading these case studies,
right,
like why they were caught and what they were doing. Okay.
You do as much preparation as you can. And then when you start to try to launch the crime, you overdo things. So, when I started filing these fraudulent tax returns, I was using proxy addresses. I was, if the guy's name was Brian Johnson, I would find a real Brian Johnson and correlate the address between the two. I would use payroll software to make sure that the figures were completely correct. I would come up with different amounts for each victim, everything else to file for. So you start out doing like that, and then you find out, then you start cutting corners. Once it works, you figure, okay, how can I make this more efficient? What can I cut out that it will still work fine? I got to the point that I was able to file a tax return manually once every 6 minutes. So I'd work Sunday through Wednesday, file roughly 180, 200 tax returns a week. Yep. 80% of those would tend to fund, and I would cash out at about $160,000 a week. At that point. So I would file Sunday through Wednesday. Thursday, I would take a road trip, plot out a map of ATMs. Friday and Saturday, I would cash those cards out. Then come back. These would come
as cards. They would come as.
Actually, it would. So the problem is, when you're looking at that type of thing, how do you have the money deposited? You don't want checks sent to you because that leaves a paper trail. Back then is when we first saw prepaid debit cards start to hit the market.
Sure.
So that's one of the things that you see time and time again is a new product comes on the market. It's a great product. The consumers are going to love it, but some engineer somewhere has not really figured out that, hey, fraudsters will love this stuff too. So they don't really think about the fraud aspects of things. So here I am, we start to see these payroll cards, basically prepaid debit cards. I'm able to order, 200 a week sometimes. So you order 200 a week, you have the tax returns deposited onto that. You take a road trip and you spend 40 to 50 minutes at an ATM sometimes, just feeding one card in, pulling out $20 bills, stuffing it in a backpack. I would come back on a Sunday. I was in Charleston, South Carolina, had a spare bedroom. $150,000 and $20 bills fits into a backpack. I would open up the bedroom door, chuck the backpack in there. Then one day, you wake up, you open that bedroom door and you're like, got to do something with all those backpacks. And that's when you learn how to launder money.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a great point, because I like, you can't just show up at the bank and say, I want to open a bank account with 120.
I remember because, I was a lot of it, and criminals are like that. They're good in one area, but they're naive in other things.
You like Blacklist. You ever watch the show Blacklist?
Yeah, it's a good show. It's a good show.
And then, it's very, very interesting. But okay, I stopped you, but you got.
No, you're fine.
For the laundry part.
Yeah, so criminals, they'll be good in one area, and they're naive in other places. They don't really understand, and it's a process of learning it when you learn it. All right. So me, I was stealing all this money. So I've got all these 20s and, I've got, okay, I'd like a jet ski or I'd like a boat. So here I am, idiot that I am. I walk in with a satchel full of $20 bills. And I'm looking at the jet skis. I'm like, which is the best ski you've got? They point out this 4-seat Yamaha ski, and I'm like, that's the best one. I'm like, yeah. I was like, how much is that? And I think it was like $14K or something. But I was like, you take cash? And he was like, what? And I was like, do you take cash? And he was like, yeah, we take cash. So I'm like, let's go. So here I am, broad daylight, counting out $20 stacks of 20s. Bam, 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 bam. Got 3 people counting it. The guy who owns a power sports store, he's in the back. He finally comes up front. And he's like, what are you, a drug dealer? And I'm like, no, I'm a cyber criminal. And he was like, yeah, you are. I'm like, you're right. It's funny, right? So, but that's part of it. You do stupid stuff.
Yeah.
Stupid stuff. That tends to be what gets criminals caught is this, not understanding what's raising flags a lot of the time. ShadowCrew goes on to make the front cover of Forbes, of course. August 2004. It was a headline, who's stealing your identity. It was about ShadowCrew. It was about how the FBI, the Secret Service, was investigating those sites that were up at that point. October 26, 2004, United States Secret Service arrested 33 people, 6 countries in 6 hours. That was a Sunday that happened. And I was the only guy publicly mentioned as getting away. A couple other guys had gotten away. No one talked about that. But they picked me up February 8th, 2005. I was, for you to turn your life around, you got to hit rock bottom.
Sure.
And it took me a long time to hit rock bottom, This is classic
Joseph Campbell hero's journey, that descent into hell.
And I love him. I love Joseph Campbell. So Hero with Joseph 1,000 Faces, Power Myth, all that.
Yeah, Power Myth.
Yeah. So I had been married for 9 years, had lied to my wife, my first wife, the entire 9. I had took her really 3 years to find out that I was just a criminal. And once she found that out, the next 6 years were me telling her that I'm going to stop, or I have stopped, or I will stop. Finally getting mad and telling her, hey, you're spending the money too. She leaves. And the way she leaves, I guess she understood that at the end of the day, it was the only way that I would break off with her is if she cheated on me. So she did. And I found out about it. And of course, that would end it. So she leaves, and that fear I had of being abandoned, that became real. I mean, I caused the thing, but it became real. So I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, just crying every day, walking around in a daze, getting suicidal. And it's kind of like a comedy. So I've realized I'm getting suicidal, and I'm like, got to do something. Go over, grab the yellow pages, open it up to psychologist. I'm flipping through psychologists, and there's criminal psychology. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, shit, I need that. So I'm like, I'm crying to the psychologist. I tell her everything. And she's like, come in today. So I go in and I spill my guts. I have the conversation. If I tell you stuff, are you allowed to report to law enforcement? She's like, not unless you're actively committing crime. I was like, well, I'll just leave that point out. So I tell her everything. And I saw her for about 4 months. And she was trying to get me to quit breaking the law, trying to get me to go into real estate, and me being the asshole that I am. I'm like, real estate, what, is there a difference? But what happens is I was 34. And I'm the guy, because my mom was a drug addict. I never used drugs, never drank or anything else like that. Started drinking when I was 34. And so I saw the psychologist for about 4 months. And one night I get lonely and the libido's acting up a bit. So I'm like, never been to a strip club. Let's try that. So I walk into a strip club, 34 years old, had never done that before. And that naivete pops in again. It's not like you're a criminal and you understand everything. No, right. I was very naive. So I walked in and I'm that idiot. I literally, the first stripper that I saw is the one I fell in love with. She walks by. I'm like, that one, that's the one. So I ended up moving her in my house. After I moved her in my house, found out she was addicted to cocaine, not only addicted to cocaine, but was prostituting herself to support that habit. And I guess I adopted, I got on my cape and goggles and played superhero, figure if I could save her, everything would be all right.
Sure.
So, and I make light of that, Bill, but that's a lot of the truth there. I had, a part of me felt that if I could really save her, that we would love each other and we'd be all right. And I was head over.
Isn't that what your father did?
Yeah, same thing. The exact same. The exact same. I mean, you could look back and say, oh yeah, that's where he got that from. That's where he got that from. Yeah. I mean, you could read me like a book on that. So she didn't know I was a criminal either, of course, because I was a liar. I lied to everybody.
Sure.
So here I am. It's like ShadowCrew gets busted. And I got it in my head. Her name was Elizabeth. I got it in my head that I could keep her mind off drugs by giving her whatever she wanted. Whatever she wanted, I'd do. So that quickly became, you'd spend $300-500 a night at dinner. It'd become, I'd withdraw $11,000 on a Friday and on a Monday morning, not have anything left, nothing, and no idea what happened to it. So I quickly went through, I'd laundered all my money over to Estonia, and I quickly went through everything in the U.S. side. Meanwhile, ShadowCrew gets busted. Now, I had stepped aside of ShadowCrew at that point. I was doing the tax return fraud. I had stepped away from that and was engaged to it. By this point, I was engaged to Elizabeth because I kept thinking if I just keep investing, everything will work out. So I didn't have any money all of a sudden. ShadowCrew gets busted. I can't do tax fraud because tax season's over. I can't go into credit card fraud because the Secret Service has shut all that down and you have no idea who you're talking to anymore. So it was paranoia through the roof. Sure. It's like, what are you going to do? So I had always preached to people, never run counterfeit checks. And that's what I started doing. Start running counterfeit checks and knew the end was coming, knew it. And I get picked up running that.
Okay.
I didn't have enough money to buy by that point in time, I didn't have enough money to buy the engagement rings for us. So she wanted Tiffany rings, of course. So I defrauded 2 people out of those via eBay. And then she wanted Tiffany wedding bands. Certainly didn't have enough money for that. So defrauded more people out of that. And that's where I got picked up was at that point right there.
Do you think that the skill that is most, what do you think the skill is most important, or do you think is most prevalent now with what's happening with cybercrime? Do you think it's more the technical skills,
no, it's not technical,
or is it the social engineering part?
It's both. Social engineering. Without social engineering, cybercrime ultimately fails. Now you can build the best ransomware in the world.
Yep.
You can have whatever program you've got out there, but if you can't deploy that, if you can't put it on a system, it's useless to you. So they work in conjunction. I would argue that social engineering is more important, but it boils down to getting someone to trust you enough that they do what you want them to do. And the way you get people to trust you, if you're a criminal online, is by using technology, tools, and then finally social engineering. So, we've got a cell phone, we've got a laptop in front of us. We tend to trust that tech. We don't really understand a lot of it a lot of the time, but we trust it. We trust the stories that come across. Yep. We trust if a number comes across on our cell phone, that it's the number that it says it is. We don't understand that criminals can use tools to manipulate that technology, to spoof a phone call or spoof a location or something like that. So it's technology and tools lays base levels of trust, but then finally it's whatever that social engineering looks like. Is it the phishing email? Is it a Unicode domain? Is it something like that that's being used to finally trick the person into giving whatever you want them to give, information, access, data, or cash?
So where do you file, what is your, when you're working with someone these days, and we're going back to how you turned your life around
Sure.
in a moment, but when you're working with a customer now, with a company, what is your superpower that you most often see that you're able to help them with as you're in your engagement?
Sure. I am extremely good at knowing the vector of which a company will be attacked.
Okay.
So if
because you can see it through a different angle, you can see it. Okay.
I know what criminals are looking at. I know how they're going to do it. And typically I can either pull up enough data that shows that, hey, I'm not the only one that knows this. Criminals have been talking about you for a while. Or, I'm very good I've been extremely good since I've turned the curve and I'm this good guy now. I've been extremely good about anticipating different types of cybersecurity or cybercrime trends that are coming up. So on the merchant side, you've got this thing that's eating merchants alive this year called friendly fraud. It's basically refund fraud is what it is.
Okay.
So I was talking about that 5 years ago. Synthetic fraud was one of the first people that started talking about that, period, telling them it was a problem. Now it's 80% of all new account fraud. It's the fastest growing form of financial crime on the planet. So it's
synthetic fraud.
Synthetic fraud. It's weird. It's this thing where you can. So the Social Security Administration, they randomized Social Security numbers in 2011. They did that to combat identity theft, because if I know the last four of your number,
sure,
and I know the state you're born in and the year you're born, it's very easy for me to get the first five. It's an algorithm. It's very easy to pick that out. So the Social Security Administration, they randomized it to stop that fraud. It did. But when they did that, it now allows criminals to either fabricate numbers or to use a child's Social Security number,
right.
Build new credit profiles, and then cash out at that point. Extremely, extremely effective from a criminal point of view. So it's very easy. It's not very easy, but I've got this skill level where I'm able to kind of gauge the pulse of the way the cybercrime community is going. And I guess that's where I was, on the ground floor of developing and implementing a lot of these crimes. Nowadays we've got a couple of channels like Discord, Telegram that are really setting the tone for the way cybercrime is going to go into the future. Those types of channels and communication areas. But that's my primary skill is that. I'm very good about being able to, I can be technical, but I prefer to not. It's I think it's very important that we be truthful about things. You don't have to make things highly complicated,
sure,
especially if you're talking to a manager someplace. So it's we've got this perception that attackers are these computer geniuses, these specters. We see that we've got 7,000 security companies, and a lot of them are snake oil salesmen. And there's a lot of them that sit there, and it's easier to scare a potential client into thinking that it's a computer hacker that you're never going to be able to track down, and he's able to get into your system whenever. The problem with that is that it's not really true. The problem is not that they're specters. The problem is that typically it's the company is not doing what they need to. You've got 92% of every breach uses known exploits.
So why are we going after? Why are the bad actors going after medical records now? Why are hospitals and the medical system? Why are those records so much more valuable on the dark web versus like a credit card data?
Well, it used to be that's the weird thing. It used to be that, and when I was running things, you would have somebody that would come in with thousands of medical records and not be able to sell them. I mean, they had no value whatsoever. Okay. And you'd typically have this person, this criminal, who'd come on and say, well, what will you give me for them? And they would be begging for something. And then finally they'd just start giving a lot of stuff out free. what was found out and that's because it was very easy at that point in time to launch a phishing attack, and you could ask all of this PII, and the victim would fill it in. They weren't educated enough to know better than that. Nowadays, medical records are a primary source for information. You can get all the PII in the world. A lot of credit card information's there. You can get the medical history, but
that's why it's so much more valuable.
Oh, it's crazy. The amount of data that you can get from that is absolutely crazy, and it's very easy to hit. You know, you've got HIPAA, but I'm going to tell you, there's not a criminal in the world who really gives a damn about HIPAA.
Right. You know, and you know, it's not really it's not useful, and it does anything. It just identifies broad scopes of what to do and not do. You know, it's not very poignant and pointed about how to structure your defense.
But, you know, it gets worse than that. I mean, I do believe in training or cybersecurity training for compliance, but it has to be done properly. And I believe in doing it for effectiveness as well. You know, what I see, and I'm in Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham has they've transitioned from that iron steel town into a medical town.
Okay.
And, you know, I'm fortunate enough, my wife at one point was a medical practice manager. And typically what you're seeing is with their HIPAA training is the employees sit down during lunch break and they watch a video, and that's it. And then they, you know, there's a couple of questions they have to answer after that, and that's it. So there's no retention at all about that type of training.
So what do you think the best training is? Like,
it needs to be hands-on. It needs to be
you do a lot of this training. I watched a video where you're doing something with AARP.
Right. Yeah. Right. It needs to be hands-on. It needs to be personalized. It needs to be. I was talking because we're getting ready to launch. Hopefully, we're getting ready to launch some training videos, but sometime next year. But I was talking to the guy, and he was like, "Well, why you? Why are you going to do that?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Look," he said, "there's all kinds of training videos out there. You need to do something that someone is going to remember. You know, make it basically the Forrest Gump of cybersecurity awareness training. Someone is going to engage with that. It's going to be entertaining, but it's going to be something that they remember.
Storytelling.
Storytelling. That's what it's all about. If you're preaching at someone, they're not going to retain that. No. And that's typically what you see all the time with cybersecurity training. You get some guy that's out on lecture podium and he's lecturing.
See, that's what you got to do is just tell stories. Like you have all these little stories on your podcast. You could take those as a prelude into the actual training. People would be glued to it.
We're hoping something like that.
So let's wrap this up. But I want to wrap it up with how you tell us how you started to get things back together on track, and so that return, you know, to the hero's journey, descent into hell, and then comes out with a story to tell, essentially to teach everybody.
I went to work for the Secret Service. I was arrested. They let me sit a week at the county jail in Charleston, South Carolina. And when I say sit a week, it was in the holding area for a week. I slept on a table, on a metal steel table, because it was that crowded. There was not room enough to you could not sit down or anything else. You just made the best spot you could. I was a week there. Secret Service flies in from New Jersey. They pull me out of the cell. They look at me and said, "We got your laptop." I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "You got anything on your laptop?" I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "You're going to be charged for whatever's on it." And I'm like, "I figured." And then they look at me and they say, "Hey, is there anything you can do for us?"
Oh.
Well, they arrested me 3 weeks before I was supposed to be married to this Elizabeth girl. And I was head over heels with her. I looked at them, and my exact words, still remember that to this day, my exact words were, "Hey, man, you let me get back with her, I will do whatever you want me to do." They looked at me and said, "We're going to get you out." I'm like, yes. They let me sit there 3 more months to get a taste of it. Finally, they get me bonded out. They reduced the bond from $327,000 cash to $1,000 cash. My sister pays the bond. My first phone call isn't to my sister, it's to Elizabeth. "I'm out, baby." During that 3-month time, she had visited, 2-3 times, had taken 2 or 3 calls. That was it. So I tell her I'm out. She's like, "I'll be there. It's midnight." She had a friend that ran a limo company. She pulls up in a limousine. Me and a Secret Service agent are standing in the parking lot. She pulls up in a limousine, pops the trunk, gets out, gets these 2 plastic storage containers with my clothes in them, drops them in the parking lot, comes over, hugs me, call me later, leaves. I'm sitting there. I start crying like a baby. Secret Service guy, he looks at me. He's like, "Is that your fiance?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He was like, "Dude, I am so sorry." I'm like, "Yeah." But I was so convinced that he had to pay my hotel room that first night.
No way.
I didn't have a house anymore. He paid my hotel bill. I had $30 to my name. As soon as he leaves, I walk, because I didn't have a vehicle. I walk to Walmart, buy a prepaid debit card so I can start back in tax fraud.
Oh, wow.
I then call Elizabeth and beg her to get back with me. She does. And for the next 10 months, I break the law while working for the Secret Service, often from inside Secret Service offices.
Okay.
Yeah. They find out after 10 months, like, yeah, you knew they were going to. They find out I take off on a cross-country crime spree.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Still $600,000 in 4 months. I'm in Las Vegas, Nevada. The night before, I had stolen $160,000 out of ATMs. Woke up the next morning. A friend of mine, Max Butler, was running a website called Carter's Market. I signed on to Carter's Market. There is my name, U.S. Most Wanted, beside it.
No way.
Yeah. And I joke about it, saying that's not just an aha moment. I actually sat there for a few minutes looking at that, clicked on it. It was a link to the Secret Service, had my information on there. And I'm sitting there going, okay, Brett, what now? Because I was planning on bugging out to Brazil. I had found a house in Florianopolis. I was going to live down there and start my fraud ring up again. So I'm sitting there looking at it, and I'm like, okay, Brett, you've made the United States Most Wanted list. What do you do? And I said it out loud. I'm like, I'm going to Disney World. And that's exactly what I did. I went to Disney World. Lasted about 6 weeks. The Secret Service, they came and got me, arrested me, sent me to prison. 6 weeks into prison, I escape.
Wow.
Yeah, escaped prison. And they caught me a few weeks after that. And they sent me to a real prison at that point out in West Texas. And what happened was, what gets me turned around, Bill, 3 things. It starts with my sister.
Okay. My
sister disowned me because of my relationship with that stripper.
Right.
She knew I was a criminal, but she could not handle that. So she disowned me, and she didn't talk to me for over a year. During that year is when I get arrested, go to prison, escape, everything else. So after the escape, I'm in a county jail in Lexington, Kentucky. My dad comes to visit, and he was like, can I do anything for you? And that's where I had hit rock bottom right there. He's like, can I do anything for you? And I'm like, you could tell my sister I said I love her. Dad gets on the phone, calls Denise. Denise is 7.5 hours away, pregnant with my niece. And he tells her. Denise gets in the car, and she drives those 7.5 hours to come and see me for 10 minutes to tell me she loves me.
Wow.
And it took 2.5 years. It took 2.5 years behind the fence for me to realize that the reason I was in jail wasn't because, I told myself, I did it to help my family, my wife, my stripper girlfriend. No, it took 2.5 years for me to realize that I did it because I chose to do it. I chose to hurt people because that was my decision. Hard pill to swallow when you start accepting responsibility for hurting people. So I got out in 2011. No taste of breaking the law whatsoever.
And was that true? How long was that time frame?
I spent a total of 7 years in prison.
So the 2.5 year mark was when you really felt the shift. And
that's when I came to terms with things.
And then you finished out the balance of the, okay.
Right. So got out in 2011. No taste of breaking the law whatsoever. I was under 3 years probation, could not touch a computer, wonder why. But I had job offers from Deloitte, from KnowBe4, a couple of payment processors. Sure. Couldn't take them. Got to the point I was trying to apply for fast food. No, that payment terminal, that's a computer. Can't take it.
Can't do that.
So then it's like, well, what about a waiter's position? Well, no, that's computers and credit cards. You're an idiot. So I literally could not get a job. That's what a lot of people don't understand. I mean, you can't get a job selling cars, nothing else, because you stole money. There's a big difference between hiring someone who dealt drugs or something like that compared to someone who's an embezzler or someone who steals money. Sure. So you can't get a job. I was bumming money from my dad and my sister. I had a roommate that was taking care of half the rent. I was on food stamps.
It's probably you were better taken care of in prison than you were when you first came out.
Much
because
better.
You had food, you had regular, running water.
I actually got to the point. I told my dad at one point, I wish I was back in. At least there, I knew the way.
So that was real rock bottom is coming out.
Yeah,
Almost.
And it keeps going though. I mean, I'm the guy. So I was on food stamps, everything else.
Okay.
They tell you to find something you care about. You may not recidivate. I had a cat. That's what I had. And I had enough money to feed my cat, and I didn't have enough money to buy toilet paper. So first crime I committed, go to the dollar store, buy the cat some food. On the way out, they had a kiosk with toilet paper there, and I stole toilet paper. I didn't want to get back online and commit crime.
Sure.
So I shoplifted. And what happens is my wife now, Michelle, she ended up finding me about the same time. I didn't find her. She found me. I ended up moving in with her about 2 months later. Finally, I get a job. The only job I could get was pushing a lawnmower. That was it. And had to beg to get that. But I started pushing a lawnmower, busting ass doing that. What happens is once it gets cold, the job ends.
Right.
Can't mow any grass. I talk about motivations of cybercrime. It's ideology, status, or cash. With me, it was cash, but it's what you can do with it. With me, I'm the guy who buys love. It's never enough. It's never been enough for me to show love in a healthy way in a relationship. I have to buy gifts. I have to go overboard all the time. So the job ends. I don't have any money coming in. I'm like, I've got to do something. I've got to show it to her that I'm worth it in this relationship. She's the only one working. So I get it in my head, well, at least I can bring food in the house. So idiot Brett gets on the dark web, buys stolen credit card details, starts ordering food, starts stealing food online. And I get caught. Go back to prison for 10 months. At my sentencing, the probation office, prosecutor, U.S. Marshals, the judge, and Michelle. Michelle stands up and she's crying. She tells the judge that I'm a better dad to her kids than their father is. I'm sitting there crying like a baby. I get 10 months and go back. What I find out is that entire time, Michelle didn't need me for what I could give her. She just wanted me for me.
Sure.
And I had never had that before. So I get out after 10 months. I'm off probation at this point, so I can touch a computer now. Start looking for work. Nobody's going to hire you, man. You're the guy who steals money. Nobody's going to hire you. And I know what my triggers are. I know I'll go so far before I start doing it again. So I looked at Michelle and I was like, let me see what I can do. So I go and of all things, I signed on to LinkedIn is what I did. And I reached out to this guy named Keith Malarski, FBI agent out of Pittsburgh. He was involved. I mean, he had been involved in some of the people that I knew that had been arrested. I mean, just FBI super cop, this guy. And I sent him a message. And the message was, hey, I respect everything you did. I think you did a great job. No hard feelings, just lots of respect for you. By the way, I'd like to be legal. And I sent him that message. And he responded within 2 hours. And he gave me advice. He gave me references. He does that to this day. That guy does this. Wow. He's retired from the FBI now, but he does that to this day. From there, it was the head of the Identity Theft Council, took me under his wing. The head of the editor of the CNP group, Card Not Present group, she hires me for a paid speaking gig.
Okay.
Microsoft comes in and hires me once they hear about it. And it kind of went like wildfire. Today, things shut down because of COVID this year, but I typically keynote somewhere between 50 to 70 conferences a year.
Wow. I
consult. I'm working on a book, a couple of TV shows, got 2 podcasts.
Now, were you really a theater major in college?
I was.
Okay, because you got a voice. You got a theater voice.
Honestly, Bill, I'm not. I used to be conceited with that, but I'm scary good on stage when it comes to theater.
Yeah, I noticed that your presence is very strong.
Yeah, and I used to be conceited. I used to be a really conceited guy with that, but took a lot of time to get humility. But
that's quite a powerful kind of coming from that zero state and like continually pummeled. It's a powerful people don't understand how hard it is to change your first 10 years of your life.
It is.
And to read that programming, if you don't get that, if you get it right and you're perfectly parented, you're golden. If you don't get it right, you've got a whole set of challenges. But the thing is, it's a powerful thing to redo it. And
with me, it's and I want people to understand that what really separates me, the reason I'm not back in prison right now for 20 years, it could have been easily Brett Johnson back for 20.
Yeah.
The reason I'm not is that I had enough people out there who took a chance on me. The people like the Identity Theft Council, Keith Malarski, the FBI, Microsoft, all these groups, they didn't have to do that. They put their necks on the line to give me this chance. We talk about the power of mentors, Brett. The power of we're the average of the 5 people we surround ourselves with, and we talk about that quite a bit in the CIO Innovation Forum. And you're a perfect example of that. If you had to look at your 5 closest friends, 10 years ago, and your 5 closest friends today, the people, it's just completely huge difference. And
you rise to the level of that clique, that cohort, that group.
You do. You truly do. You truly do. And I lead a blessed life that I don't deserve, but man, am I thankful for it. Every single day of my life, I get choked up thinking about it. But I truly am thankful for the opportunity I've been given.
Well, I'm going to at the end of the show notes, I'm going to put links to everybody to so they can connect with you on LinkedIn. Sure. You have a very strong presence on LinkedIn and your podcasts and ways that with that they can engage with you. I imagine whether it's speaking or whether it's consulting with organizations, that the mind that you have is a very unique gateway into what people are trying to protect right now.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So I want to thank you for sharing your story. It's powerful, and it's going to be. I know people are going to be glued to it.
Bill, thank you for having me. I do appreciate it again.
You're
Stay
welcome.
safe out there.
That's a pleasure. Thank you. Have a good day.